So our 3 points were this. First, we took the word foresight, and we looked at, we were talking about that word, and we said, foresight is looking at that bigger picture and understanding the right milestones to achieve, and then making the right choices daily to achieve those milestones. The second point we had was diversity creates efficiency. And we were talking about how we need to create diverse teams because everybody will have a different perspective, and then leaders understanding to appreciate those different perspectives. And the third one came from what we learned from Peggy today, and her comment that the patient experience cannot exceed the employee's experience. And with that, we said, well, then the employee becomes the customer. And that when we're designing our plans as leaders, we have to take into account not just the external customer, but the internal customer.
So 3 points that we had at our table, we had, as far as foresight goes, we started here. We started that we noticed that all 3 came to humility by a different road, whether it was from their family or the modeling or just kind of experience in the workplace, and it became a driver in their leadership. And we just thought that was a neat place because then with humility also comes that ability to listen, to understand, and use that as part of what informs your direction as a leader, and then living your values. So setting that goals, but then keeping that your values as an anchor to achieve your goals, and that and obviously just understanding that in the midst of that, as we're achieving our goals, that success comes in rooting yourself in the values and listening and in that humility. So those were our 3 takeaways.
One of our takeaways was just, the people you impact, and so the 3 people that you can impact in our daily work. So we found that to be very impactful. And just earlier, before we even started with the speakers, was just remembering who makes our food, who's in the background, that we normally don't even think about, and who's serving us. We think about what we're doing, but who's serving us, and making sure that they are elevated and they are considered people of worth. And then we talked about the biases that we all have. We all have biases wherever we come from, wherever we look like, whatever color, whatever gender, whatever it is. And trying to make sure that we do self-inflection and work on ourselves to deal with our own biases. And someone suggested that maybe, it'd be good if we all took the free, it's online, free, the Harvard implicit bias that you can do based on race or gender, whatever it is, and just see where you fit, and then how you can be impactful in your work and in your circles that way.
Okay, we looked at a number of the things that were said and kind of related it to, let's just say, us and our experiences. And the first thing that we talked about was the whole racism thing in the Starbucks, and how it did, or how it is trying to get resolved, in the fact that, the CEO is listening. He's trying to resolve the situations. He's being, proactive or on towards the situation. So it's not trying to wash it away. It's like, this happened, this is how we're going to deal with it. And this is, him being a leader that way. The other thing that we looked at is, children, the youth. What do we bring with youth? We should identify them. We should acknowledge them. We shouldn't just say, well, we're just, we're training you to be us. It's like, we need to listen to them. We need to understand, them. And then the other thing we kind of touched on was, the HR issue. And a lot of it had to do with Dave, and then, well, no, not just Dave. No, Dave and myself, being managers and not being able to, and being a little older, not being able to ask people the questions like, we can't as males get to really know people because we might ask the wrong question, so we have to be very careful. in to try to be a leader. You want to be a leader to learn about the people that work for you or that you work with, but sometimes we feel that we're kind of hindered in that too, on our capabilities.
All right, so our table is a little bit green. Get it? Green leaf. So we're newer to this whole leadership. I love puns. Newer to this whole servant leadership experience, except for Tim, who was at our table. But we just talked about, like, we really think that the main common theme of today was about listening. And it's really important as leaders to make sure that we are listening, we're hearing our staff out. And in particular, if we're having staff who are maybe newer and they're having a hard time getting on the same page with the rest of your team. And maybe that's an opportunity where you can help to talk to them about just having some self-awareness of things, which I know is also another topic about servant leadership, to help the staff grow in those different ways. So another big part was just the experiences that we all have to share, which we are able to learn about each other's experiences just from being able to listen to what everyone has to share about what's part of their journey and where their background, their knowledge, the things that they have to share to the whole team to make them grow together.
Hi, my name is Ariel Ackerman. I am a proud alum of Alverno, but I currently work for Milwaukee County at the Behavioral Health Division out on Watertown Plank Road. And we talked about everything. This was just awesome, an awesome event. But most of our conversation circled around the question about, like, what can we do to fight racism here locally in our community and, of course, like, across the nation. And, like, the biggest thing we talked about is that it has to come from both places, like from the top down, but it also starts from the bottom up. And so we as individuals have to do our part in ensuring that everybody is included, that everybody is valued. And so one thing that I'm proud to say that Milwaukee County does is that we're under the Department of Health and Human Services, and so they invested in a leadership excellence program for all of their leaders. And one of the sessions is based around healthy interactions and acknowledging unconscious bias, which I'm glad that you mentioned, because it's so important. We may say that we don't see color, that we see the person, but that we need to acknowledge that that's not always the case, that we grow up with things that force us to see things, and we have prejudice that we don't understand sometimes, and so bringing those to the surface is so crucial. And so we had training on that, and that was something that I not only valued, but then I was able to teach that to a young adult group at a retreat. And so we're responsible for taking in knowledge and wisdom that we get from other people, but we're also responsible for owning it and then sharing it with others. Like, when we own the things that we learn, and when we are able to value people and demonstrate that to others, but also teach others to do it, it is just really powerful and is something that we can do as a culture to change the culture. Thanks.
We wanted to thank the speakers, and most of our conversation came from listening to them today. And John's points of living as a servant leader before he even knew what a servant leader was is something we talked a lot about, and the authenticity of that, whether it's labeled or not labeled, that authenticity has to come through and be lived. Then, Peggy's point that we talked a lot about was purpose, and a higher purpose, and that really facilitates selflessness, which gets at the root of really serving others and then living that every day, not for us, but for those around us. And then kind of the congruency of that with being the same person at home as you are at work, as you are in this meeting, as you are filling up your car with gas, whatever it is. That was another point that we talked about and really took from Jesse's discussion of how he's modeled that journey and brought that congruence together. So, thank you.
We talked about how servant leadership is hard because it's often a long-term game, and our instant gratification, quarterly earnings culture in America and our world today it often clashes against that. So it takes the foresight to be able to see long-term and how this is going to impact the far future, and have the patience to wait for the results. Another thing we mentioned is using failure as an opportunity to learn and grow. Both in ourselves and in our employees or our children. It's big for parenting as well. So Children's Hospital says fail fast. That's that's part of their DNA. So the quicker you fail, the faster you'll learn and grow. And then thirdly, if servant leadership is in your vocabulary, but not in your heart, it will do more harm. So humility and integrity works a lot better than pride and loudspokenness.
Hello. Among the things that we talked about at my table over here is really working on the process of the servanthood, the leadership, and actualizing it. So it's a lot of small steps or interactions with people throughout the days, and it's more than just a title and a job. It's really who we're being with each other. The people at my table from the same company, it's like I can really see how you all are there for each other, and you bring it to the customer and the customer's safety, and so that's really alive and well in your jobs, and it's really fascinating here about. So putting the passion at the center of what you do, focusing on the positive behavior too, because when there's negativity, we want to try to turn something into a positive, and that's like another small step of leadership, because again, we're connecting who are being in our jobs to the bigger value of the organization and the customers we're serving. Thank you.
We came up with some same things that have already been talked about, but a couple of them kind of stood out to us. One, the idea that you can become a servant leader by observing things you might not understand or recognize that it's servant leadership that your parents, your teachers, the folks that you work with are doing, but you gather that in, you get that feeling, that sense that there's some ulterior purpose there and a better one. So just by observing servant leaders in action, you can become one yourself. The other topic that we kind of talked about a bit was the idea of respect. That came up with the racism issue, and it seemed that if you had respect, racism is not really an issue because you're looking at a person as an individual, you're caring for that person, and that you will always think of that person as being first and you being second, and that should work a long ways towards eliminating some of that racism that you might feel.
To foster foresight, you need to find ways of reaching out and touching those in need within the community with compassion, loving kindness, and through listening. To begin the servant-leader relationship with others, you need to take time to establish trust, putting the client and their family's needs first. You need to let young leaders go, supporting them by being an example of a divine servant to all, and encouraging them to grow, fostering their creative ideas and connecting them to resources. Don't be afraid to ask questions or to let your immediate life circumstances confine you or your goals. Approach issues with holistic, continuous care, treating people like they're the most important reason for you being there. And engage in humble listening, especially when you're agitated, to best explore the means of the global solution that's possible in conflict resolution. Thanks.
So we noticed that all three of the panel speakers were motivated with the correct intuition. And so we found that commonality absolutely wonderful to listen to. The combination of listening and empathy, and the servant leadership as it relates to quiet leadership. And it wasn't necessarily about them. It was the layers of success that they were able to achieve through their shadows.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edith, and I'm a proud Alverno alum. Woo-hoo. Just a couple of really brief bullet points from my group. First of all, we talked about how appreciative we are that Jesse, John, and Peggy shared their servant leadership journeys with us today. Thank you for that and sharing just where you're going, where you've been and where you're going with us. A couple of remarks stood out to us. So Jesse's remark that you don't have to be a jerk to be successful really stood out for us, and I'm going to take that home and share that with my son, who's 18 now, because I think it's important for him to hear. Also, we took away John's comment that he says to his team when they meet regularly, do you have the tools to do your job? And it was really impressive that you talk to your team like that and you ask them that question coming from the sink or swim environment that you were put into. So that was very impressive. Thank you very much for that. And the last thing that we had on our list, sorry, this must be 4, is the comment from Tom this morning about motivating those who don't want to be motivated to save your breath for soup. That really stood out. So thank you very much for those things.
I'm Al Chaika with Pieper Electric. At our table, we had 3 points that we kind of came up with. The first is leading by action. Let your values be your North Star and to lead you every day. Second, treat people well because they're fellow human beings, and serve them well to allow for their growth and their development. And the third was integrity. Do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because someone's watching you.
Just a couple quick observations. We found that listening and foresight are, like a lot of the values of servant leadership, are really interconnected. Foresight just doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to ask questions, and I think, somebody echoed the point that you have to ask people on a regular basis, what are the tools you need to do your job and to be successful? So we found that pretty interesting. Finding out what drives people, not your motivations aren't necessarily going to be the same as everybody else's, so it's important to build relationships and listen to those things and remember those things. Another framework somebody brought up here at our roundtable too was to start, stop, and continue. Kind of ask people on a regular basis, what should we be starting? What activities should we not be doing? And what do we need to continue to do? So I thought that was kind of a handy little framework. So thank you.
Our group talked quite a bit about how our society tends to be, some people in our society tend to be cynical and non-trusting, and they want you to prove it. And of course, we blamed Google for that. But as far as how we would become better servant leaders, we observed that truth, caring, and warmth helps develop trust. We felt that we need to lead from a position of caring, warmth, and truth, and that personal reflection is necessary to succeed as a servant leader.
A couple of the bullet points that we touched at our table were how we can identify clear core values to be put all on the same page, and how we can work together to be one instead of just having someone above you or thinking, oh, this person's above me, how we can all be on the same page, how we can spread love and kindness in a workplace so that it feels more like a family and not like a job, and how humility can go a long way in developing listening skills, communication, always just being on the same page.